Welcome to the podcast for Renaissance Fellowship, where we are creatively and actively revealing Jesus' love to our generation. Here we find the script in Scripture and the text in context. Follow us at reddenfellowship.com or join us live Sunday nights at 6 p.m. in Sunrise, Florida, or online via Periscope. Here's our pastor, Jared Kring.
If it ain't broke, right? I had a 1973 Volkswagen Super Beetle.
Yeah.
Okay, there it is right there. Look at that beauty. Isn't she gorgeous? Isn't she gorgeous? It was rusted and faded and beautiful. It didn't have a baffle on the muffler, so it sounded like a Harley Davidson. I got pulled over and I got a ticket once for noise pollution. It was so loud. It was incredible. Coming down the road. It was awesome. But it was fun to drive. It was like driving a go-kart. You know, you go around the corners and stick shift. It was so great. And you know, it was an old Volkswagen, so it was missing some of the amenities that we're accustomed to in modern cars, like heat. Angie and I almost froze to death one winter when we had it, and we would actually bundle up more to go for a drive than we would to be in the outside. We would wear gloves and scarves and ski masks just to drive to the grocery store. And then we would make up like silly songs while we were singing to keep our mind off the fact that the cold air was blowing in on our fingers at 60 miles an hour. We could probably still sing the songs we could right now, but we're not going to. That's one of those things you keep between a husband and a wife, just for the record. But the floor pans, if you ever had a Volkswagen, the floor pans would rust out. So you could actually see the road below your feet. So it was kind of a Flintstones car. If you needed to, you could get under there and just kind of push start yourself with this car. Now, my 73 Super Beetle had an oil leak. Not a really big deal. Saying a 73 Super Beetle had an oil leak is kind of like saying a bird has wings. I mean, it's one of those things, kind of par for the course that it has. But it's something that you have to pay attention to, right? Because you don't want your car to run out of oil. So every few days, I would put a quart of oil in my Super Beetle, and I drive it around. But I never really addressed the cause of the leak. I just treated the symptom and kept it going down the road because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So when I first got the car, I would check it all the time. Like before I went out on any drive, I would go out and I would check the oil. I was super cautious with this beautiful car that I had, right? When you first get something, you're always cautious with it. But then I kind of got a feel for it. I kind of got a feel for how often it needed oil and how often things were done. So I would check it, maybe every couple of days, right? Isn't that kind of like a metaphor for life? When we first get something, we're super careful and we care for it and we watch over it. But then time happens and we get comfortable, maybe a little lazy. Familiarity breeds contempt, and before you know it, you just kind of think you know what it takes to keep things going. Well, one day I was running late, so I had to get to work, so I didn't check the oil. So I got in the car and I drove. I was zipping down towards downtown Nashville where we lived at the time. And all of a sudden, dead. Seized the motor. Totally killed it because it ran out of oil. Right, of course. So here I am, standing by the side of the road, stuck in probably one of my favorite cars I've ever owned just because it was so much fun. And nobody to blame but myself and the philosophy, if it ain't broke. I mean, have you ever said those words before? I mean, how many people have said those words, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? You see, and have you ever really thought about that as a philosophy and how terrible of a way to live your life it is? I mean, basically we're saying that we should keep doing something until it's utterly and completely broken and immobile. It is a completely reactive way of living, right? Waiting until it's smacking your face, your problems, before you do anything about them. And see, there's three things that happen when you do that. Three really terrible things. The first one is you end up causing more damage to the other parts around what's faulty, because as that begins to weaken, it puts more strain on other things. So you actually cause more damage to other things as the weakened part is about to break. The other thing is if you wait till it breaks, it costs more to fix because you don't have time. You have to get it fixed fast. So you lose your ability to negotiate, you use your ability to price compare because you've got to get it done quickly. And then the third thing is loss of efficiency, which happens gradually over time because as the big thing begins to wear down, it loses its efficiency and its ability to do what it does, but you don't notice it because it happens slowly. Now, everything that I just said applies to cars, right? But it also applies to us. When we wait until something is completely broken to fix it, we don't realize that we're doing damage to the things around us as well. When you wait until a relationship is completely broken before you do something about it, trust me, it's affecting the other relationships in your life as well and causing damage to other things in your life. And also, if you wait until something is broken to fix it, well, then you're desperate. You're desperate to move and do something. And can we all agree that human beings do not make good decisions when they're desperate? Yeah, desperation, it's one of my life mottos. Desperate is never sexy. Okay? And it's true, because when you're desperate, you make terrible decisions. And the third one, of course, is a loss of efficiency. You don't realize that as something wears down, as you begin to wear down to the breaking point, you don't realize how less efficient you become, how less productive you are, how less joy you have in your life because you're towards this breaking point and you're threadbare. But we persist in this pervasive notion in our world that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we sit back and we wait for things to go bad. We wait for them to break. And then when the moment comes, we wonder, when is it going to happen? We end up living in fear. When's my tire going to blow out? Because I know it's bald, but it's still spinning. So, but when's it going to blow out? I can see the steel belting, but it's still spinning. But every sound you hear on the freeway, you're like, oh God, there it is. Oh God, no. Have you ever had a pair of tires like that? Tires? Yeah, okay. I thought so. I figured everybody had had that. We don't want to wait. I don't want to wait until things are broken in my life to do something about them. But it seems like that's the way we live our lives. Just waiting around for something to break, and then we try to act surprised when it happens, like, oh God, how did this happen? Really? It's like me sitting on the side of the road with my Super Beetle going, why did my engine seize? Because you didn't put oil in it. Because you didn't maintain it. You didn't do what you needed to do to keep it going. And on top of that, you let a problem that you knew was a problem keep going. Just putting a Band-Aid on it every day, hoping that it would do something. But never really trying to heal what was wrong. It's like the modern church, today we sit around and where we're going, scratching our head wondering why we're losing influence, why we're losing contact with generations of people and with our culture. It's because we know what we've done. We've lost our first love. We keep doing the same things over and over again, hoping that we're going to get a different result. And meanwhile, our faith and our Savior becomes more and more tainted by being associated with the extreme factions of our religion. What's the most famous church in America? Westboro Baptist Church. How disgusting is that? How disgusting is it that the most extreme faction of our faith is the one that's the most known? Because we just keep doing the same old thing. Hey, if it ain't broke. And we do the same thing in our relationships too, don't we? We just keep drifting farther and farther apart from people, right? Just a little by little. And then one day we wake up and we don't know the person. And we break up, and when things fall apart and we go, well, I guess we just fell out of love. No. You just figured, well, we're still together, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So starting last week, we started a new series where we're looking at the kind of the 5 R's. This is the pirate series, R, right? The 5 R's of Renaissance. And these are like our core values, and not just as a church, but also as individuals. These are core things that we need to understand as people. And the 5 R's are Renaissance, Reformation, Revelation, Restoration, and Revolution. And each week we're going to be looking at one of these ideas, one of these words, and what they mean to us as a really young church, and also how they're going to drive our direction as a church, but also as people. Now, as I said, I thought about calling this the Pirate Series, but one of the things that's really interesting to me is we talked about these 5 R's when we very first started the church. We did a series, and it's interesting to me to teach it now, a year and a half later, because of what God's shown me and what he's revealed and and kind of what I thought maybe when I started and kind of what things are now. And so this is it's really been a blessing to me to kind of come back over this and look at it again and understand the growth that's happened, not just as a church for us spiritually, but as a person. So tonight, let's start with last week. Last week we looked at Jesus and this word renaissance, to be born again. And we looked at how Jesus was visited one night by a guy named Nicodemus. And Jesus boiled down this entire concept of renaissance to 2 ideas. He looked Nicodemus in the eyes and he said, you. He got away from all the we and they and thems and got to the point that renaissance, being born again, a rebirth, change, is always about you. We use other people as an excuse, as a scapegoat. But in the end, if anything is going to happen in your life, it's going to start with you taking personal responsibility for yourself. Because if you have to wait around for someone else to change in order for you to be able to change, that's a curse. Well, I would do it, but my husband. I'd change, but my mom, she just won't. And that's what people do. They use other people as scapegoats. And that's even what Nicodemus was doing. He was trying to come as this representative of a larger group, but Jesus said, no. This is about you. And then Jesus told him that you must be born again. Every single person in this room, in this city, in this state, in this world is in need of a renaissance. To be born again. A fresh start. And the thing that we learned last week that was amazing was Jesus said, unless you're born again, you can't see the kingdom. You can't. It's just a physical impossibility. Until you are reformed, until you're reborn into something new, you can't see the kingdom of God and what God has for you. It's just not possible. Paul, he had scales over his eyes and they fell off because he was blinded until he could see the kingdom. See, once God gives us a renaissance, he begins a process. And that process is reforming us. It's a reformation, if you will. Now, we learn a lot, we talk a lot here at Renaissance about Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created. That we serve a creative God. That he's an awesome creative God. So we're made in his image, so he's creative. So guess what? We're creative, right? But we learn a whole lot about God in Genesis 1, verse number 2. I want to read it to you. It says, now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Stop there. You see, God made the heavens and the earth, but he didn't make them complete. He didn't make them as they were going to eventually become and be. He made them in a state where they had to be worked with. They had to be reformed into something that was usable. Now, this is God we're talking about, right? Couldn't he have just said, heavens and earth complete? Right? And they would have been complete with all the fishies in the ocean and all the bugs crawling around and all the people in the cities, and everything could have just been, bam, done. So why make it formless and void and darkness on the face of the deep? And why? Why do that? Because he was setting a precedent for the way that he will always do things. God is not looking for perfect things or perfect people. He is looking for things and people that he can perfect. He wants to mold. He wants to reshape. He's a craftsman. He's a creator. He wants to take you as you are and form you into something more and something greater and something different.
And have you ever really been hard on yourself and you're like, man, why don't I have this figured out yet? Why am I so dense? Why am I so dumb? Why haven't I arrived after all these years? You'd think that I know something, right? But human beings were never designed to reach a destination. Like if you ever meet somebody and they're like, I have arrived. Just run. I mean, just tuck tail and run, because they are so delusional that they actually believe they've arrived at some form of destination. You know, when I was a little kid, we had this summer in Texas, right? And which I don't know why my family decided to summer in Texas. Like the worst idea ever. And it's like 400 degrees. But it's a dry heat. No, that's called an oven, by the way. A dry heat is called an oven. So anyway, we were in Texas, and we were on this drive from, I believe it was from San Antonio to El Paso, which, by the way, the only way to mark that drive is by the number of tumbleweeds you see. There's nothing on that road. So, and I remember I was watching, and way off in the distance, there was like this wavy kind of, and I was like, whoa, that's so cool. I can't wait to get up there and see what it looks like up there, what the world looks like, all wavy and fuzzy. That's going to be so cool. But no matter how far we drove, it was always further in the distance, right? Because it was the oil coming off the heat, making the oil kind of with the air, making it look all fuzzy. But in my mind, I thought, man, when I get there, so I would look, I'd say, okay, there's a green sign, and that's where the fuzzy place is. So I'd get up to the green sign, and it wasn't fuzzy. Fuzzy wasn't fuzzy, was he? So, and then I'd look forward. So no matter how far we drove, I never reached that point, because that's the way life is. You set your eyes and you fix your eyes on a destination, but by the time you get there, guess what you're looking at? Something further down the road. You were never designed to arrive. Because by the time you arrive at the place you think you were trying to get to, you've already set your eyes somewhere else. Oh, when I graduate from high school. Well, by the time you get to graduation, guess what you're thinking about? College. Oh, when I graduate from college, guess what happens when you graduate from college? Get a job. Oh, when I get married, guess what happens when you get married? Start thinking about kids. Oh, when these kids get out of the house. And guess what, when you get there? No, you start thinking about how you're going to pay for all the things you just did. You never arrive. And here's the joy I'm here to tell you. You weren't designed to do that. You weren't designed to reach a destination. You were designed to constantly be reformed and to be becoming something else and becoming something greater. See, because God never says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't think that's anywhere in a proverb. I could be wrong. Maybe somewhere in Proverbs 32, maybe the one that got cut. That might be in there somewhere. But God is a good father. He's a good dad, and he's always gently whispering in our ear, we can do better. Hey, it's all right, but we can do better. Let's do it again, because you know what? We can do better. He's always pushing us and forming us to be better. Now, we're going to take the rest of our time tonight, and we're going to look at this idea of a reformation, being reformed. But before we do that, we have to understand a simple idea, and that is that there is never any reforming of anything as long as people or a system believe that they're doing fine. Right? There has to be a realization and an acknowledgement that something is wrong. Otherwise, why would you reform it? So, we're going to be in Matthew the 5th chapter. You can go there. But before we do that, can we have just a little bit of a little history lesson?
Yes, please.
It's Professor Jared. Welcome to Class History 101. We're going to talk today about the Reformation. Thank you very much. Now, these two ideas, Renaissance and Reformation, they go hand in hand. Renaissance and Reformation. Now, the Italian Renaissance that we're familiar with from art class began in the 15th century, and it was this creative, spiritual, architectural tidal wave that basically took over Europe and blasted mankind out of the Dark Ages, okay? It was an incredible experience. And in the early 16th century, this Italian Renaissance and this artistic Renaissance collided in Germany in a very unexpected way. Now, there was a priest there by the name of Martin Luther, okay? Now, he had become very uncomfortable with a particular theology that the Catholic Church was putting forth called indulgences, okay? Now get this, indulgences were a pretty amazing idea, and I mean that sarcastically completely. Basically, the idea was that you could go to your priest and you could get forgiveness in advance for sins that you had not yet committed for a small fee. Okay, so you would say, I'm gonna go, Mr. Priest, I'm gonna go to Las Vegas this weekend, and I plan on being a bad boy, and I'm gonna do this, and this, and he'd go, okay, that'll be $472, and you're forgiven. God go with thee. Now, needless to say, this didn't sit well with Martin Luther, and he had a little bit of trouble finding some scriptural basis for this concept of indulgences. So what he did was he wrote what was called his 95 Thesis, and basically laying out everything and the scriptural backing, everything that he thought was wrong with this idea of indulgences. He takes this 95 Thesis and he goes and he nails it to the door of the Wittenberg Church. Gutsy. Very, very gutsy. Now, this action collided with something else that was happening in the Renaissance. This guy named Gutenberg had invented something called the printing press. So all of a sudden, you had the ability to mass produce information and put it into the hands of the common people. Add one more thing on top. Martin Luther then translated the Bible into his native tongue of German. Because up until that point, unless you spoke Latin, you just had to take the church's word for what they said the Bible said. So they could make up, they could say anything. Oh yeah, it says, the Bible says you're supposed to make my bed and rub my feet 3 times a day. Right here, yeah, it says, I can't read Latin? Oh, sorry. Just take my word for it, yeah. You just had to take their word. But Martin Luther came along and said, no, here it is in your native tongue. Gutenberg, you print it, and we'll put the Bible in the hands of people so they can find out for themselves what it actually says. And this was basically the catalyst for what we know as the Protestant Reformation, which is pretty much the reason that we're all not Catholic. Right. Nothing wrong with our Catholic brothers. I love them. If they love Jesus, I love them. That's great. But the reason we're not all praying to Mary is because Martin Luther one day wrote a 95 Thesis and nailed it to the door of the church. But all that began because one guy decided that something was wrong. Now, big point here. It's not that it wasn't working. It was working. Indulgences were working exactly as they were designed to work. It was a cash cow for the church. They were making money hand over fist. There's a difference between something not working and something being wrong. Do you understand? Some things can continue to work exactly as they were designed to work, but it doesn't mean that they're right. It doesn't mean they're effective. It doesn't mean they're scriptural. It doesn't mean they're godly. It doesn't mean they're good for people. But they just keep working until someone stands up and says, no, we can do better, right? We can do better. And that's what Martin Luther did. So these two ideas of Renaissance and Reformation go hand in hand. And not just historically because some guy named Martin Luther 500 years ago did something, but today in our life, because first comes Renaissance, rebirth, being born again. And then comes, once we can see the kingdom of God, then we start to see the stuff we need to change, the stuff that needs to be reformed. And that is the beautiful thing. Now, let's see how Jesus talked about this idea of maybe reformation in his own time. We're going to be in Matthew, the 5th chapter, real quick, and it's going to be in verse 21. This is the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, or at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus, he says, you have heard that the ancients were told. Stop. I love that word. Ancients were told. I love that. Jesus is immediately making a differentiation between himself and everything that came before him, okay? He is saying everything you heard before, that's old people stuff. What you're about to hear is the new hotness. This is the new thing. This is the hot thing. I remember 1992, I just got into this band called Nirvana, right? Yeah. And I wanted my dad to hear him because I thought he'd really like him. So they were going to be on Saturday Night Live that week. So I said, Dad, let's watch Nirvana on Saturday Night Live. So he's like, great, I want to hear this new band you like. So they came on, Kurt Cobain comes out. He had just dyed his hair magenta, and he was wearing a cardigan sweater, looking very brooding. I don't think he looked up from, and he played Come As You Are, right? And I looked over at my dad about halfway through the song, and no. This was not my dad's cup of tea at all. He was not digging it, and it's not that my dad has great music taste. He knows more about music than I'll ever know. But the fact that he didn't like it, I liked it that much more. I really liked it now, because somehow him not liking it made it more mine. It was my generation's. It was something that the previous generation didn't get, or they didn't understand, or whatever. It was like maybe it's rebellious, I guess. Forgive me, but it felt good because it was mine. And Jesus is playing off that right here. He's turning to people and saying, yeah, you've heard the old people say. This is what they say, but I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to tell you something new. So read on to what it says. And it says, Jesus says, you have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder. And whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. Stop right there. Another thing I want you to just kind of take notice of is that Jesus is talking about the Ten Commandments here. He's talking about thou shalt not kill. But he's referring to it as something that the ancients said. He's not saying some obscure law in the book of Leviticus, but this is like one of the Ten Commandments. But Jesus is, just like he would later say, I did not come to destroy the law, but I came to fulfill it. He's making a differentiation here. But read on. It says, but I say to you, verse 22. Here's the line. You've heard it said before this, but now let me tell you something. This is what I say. And the rest of chapter 5, Jesus goes on to do this with so many other things. He said, you've heard it said before this, but I say to you. You've heard this, but I say to you. Over and over again, making this differentiation. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. Now, I want you to get what Jesus does here. Jesus takes this idea of murder and he rewinds it to the core cause, which is anger. See, what had happened is that people in Jesus' time, they had all these laws. And the problem with laws is that we're people. And over time, we figure out how to bend them. We figure out how to break them. We figure out how to avoid them. And after a while, we just figure out how to ignore them. That's the problems with laws. It's just like a baby who reaches up for the stove. You smack their hand. Don't touch the stove. What do? Don't touch the stove. The laws are like slapping the hand. Don't do this. Don't do this. But what happens? The minute you turn your back, the baby reaches up and touches the stove. See, that's the problem with law. It's only as good as who's watching at any particular moment. And that was the problem with people, was that they had all these laws, and as long as people were watching, but they were trying to find ways to get around it. Yeah, I treat my family terrible. Yeah, I'm awful to the people that work for me. I'm awful at my job. I'm always yelling at everyone, but hey, I didn't kill anybody, right? Right? I didn't kill anybody. The same is true for us. Yeah, I got road rage. Yeah, I tell people on the road what I feel with my fingers. Yeah, I yell at the TV news every night because everybody's idiots. Yeah, I do all that. But you know what? I never killed anybody. At least I never shot anybody on road rage yet. But I mean, we've lowered our standards so much. But here's Jesus, and he comes back and says, no. We're going to change this is a paradigm shift. We're no longer going to talk about what people do. Everything in the Old Testament was about what you do. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. We're not going to talk about what you do. We're going to talk about who you are. We're going to talk about the heart. Because what's driving someone to commit murder is anger. So if you have the same anger in your heart that would commit murder, but you haven't just actually done that sin, what's the difference? You still have the anger. The problem's not murder, the problem's anger. The problem's not adultery, the problem is lust. Rewinding and getting to the core heart problem that drives what we do. If you change a person's heart, you automatically change their actions. Like that. But just because you force a person to change their actions doesn't mean that you've done anything in their heart. So Jesus came and said, forget what people are doing. Who are they? Where is your heart? Because where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Everything boiled back down to the heart. And what are we feeling? The heart is the key. Now let's pick it up in verse 23. Therefore, if you are presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering. I love what Jesus is telling us here. He is telling us to not be reactive, be proactive. If you know something isn't functioning the way that it's supposed to, don't wait until it breaks. Don't wait until the person who has a problem with you slaps you in the face or takes you to court. Go. Be proactive in resolving your situations. Go deal with it face to face. Be the first to say something and create an atmosphere of resolution and reconciliation. When you're dealing with matters of the heart and changing the heart of a human being, you can't wait until things explode in your face before you do things. Because if you do wait that long, then it's probably too late. Things have already accelerated beyond a point where you can do anything about it. It's already boiled over. But if you're proactive, if you know something, you ever get that thing, you know something's just not right. Somebody's got an issue with you, there's just something not right, and you wait and you ignore it, and then like 2 weeks later it just blows up in your face. You're like, man, I knew it. I knew there was something wrong. But I didn't do anything about it. See, when God begins to reform our heart, he reforms our life. That's how the Reformation happens. We begin to see the things that are wrong. See the things that are wrong even before they're totally wrong. And we head things off at the past before they even become issues. We begin to get that sixth sense and inclination with people and relationships and problems, and because we can see. Because we can see. I don't know about you, but there are things in my life that I want to reform. I want a reformation to happen in my life. I don't want to wait until my engine is seized and I'm by the side of the road stuck. I don't want to wait that long anymore. I feel like I don't want to be that person that's constantly behind the 8 ball because I just waited until it broke before I actually addressed anything. And here's my challenge for you tonight. I want you to take a minute, and I want you to think about something that you would like reformed in your life. Some area there where a reformation could happen. And I'm not talking about learning to play guitar better or learning how to, cook, chicken cordon bleu. I mean, I'm talking about something at your core that just isn't the way you want it to be. Maybe you're too angry. Maybe you've got a short fuse and you blow up on people for no reason. Maybe your tenderness is gone. That softness with people that you used to have or that you want to have just isn't there anymore. Maybe your sense of humor has left and you just don't laugh anymore. Maybe you're paranoid. Maybe you're bad with money. Maybe you've accumulated too much debt. Maybe you're stingy. Maybe you're just sad. You just don't want to be sad anymore. Something that could be reformed in yourself. And here's the good news, is it can happen. It can. People can change. Reformation can happen. You can have a rebirth and a reformation in your life. And it can start now, but you can't persist in this notion, well, I'm just going to keep going. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. At least I'm putting one foot in front of the other. I'm trudging along. I don't want my life to be trudging along. I don't want my life to be, I'm putting one foot in front of the other. I guess I'll survive. Is that really the way we have to live? Or can we find what it is that's dragging us down and reform it? Have that reformation in our heart. But it starts with realizing where the oil leaks are. You got to realize where the problems are that are going to cause you to be broken. The little things that are leaking out of your life. Maybe it's your joy that's leaking out. Maybe it's your hope. Maybe it's your faith that's leaking out a little bit at a time. And you keep trying to fill it, but you're pouring stuff in a bucket that's got a hole in it. And you got to fix the hole so what's poured into you can stay. Otherwise, you're going to stop pouring in, and one day you're just going to wake up and realize that you're burnt out, or you're cooked, or you're lonely, you're depressed, and you can't go on any further. But it's got to start with an admission that there's something wrong. You got to start like Martin Luther. This isn't working. What I'm doing right now isn't working for me. And God, please help me find something and a new way to do it. I want to be reformed. Does anybody else want to be reformed? Do you want a reformation? Do you want something in your life that is just leaking out and is a constant source of turmoil and stress to be reformed? It can start tonight, but it starts by stopping and ignoring the problem, because you don't want to be the super beetle on the side of the road. You want to keep moving forward. And that's my prayer. That's what reformation is about. But you can't have reformation until you have Renaissance. I struggled with this for a long time, and historically I looked at it. What came first, the Reformation or the Renaissance? Did the Renaissance spark the Reformation, or did the Reformation spark the Renaissance? Which happens first? And it was a revelation to me that you have to have Renaissance first. There has to be a rebirth in your heart and your soul. You have to be born again. Otherwise, you can't see what needs to be reformed. And I'm not just talking about an eternity-only Renaissance. Sometimes we just need to have a rebirth in our lives. Even if we've been a Christian for 30 years, it doesn't matter. Sometimes you just need to be born again and recommit so that you can take some of the scales that have come across your eyes and see what God has for you. Renaissance first, and then Reformation.
We hope you enjoyed our podcast. We invite you to subscribe and spread the word on your favorite social media, and follow us at REN Fellowship, or keep up with us at renfellowship.com. Tune in next time as we continue to share the gospel according to common sense.